Keoni DeFranco is a Kanaka Maoli Kia'i, a native Hawaiian guardian of land and water rights, and an organizer of Oahu water protectors, which has been involved with the local organizing to shut down Red Hill. He leads Malama Venture Studio, an Oahu-based organization which focuses on building regenerative community-based jobs rooted in Hawaiian culture and innovative technology. Keoni is a member of the nation of Hawaii, assisting in their right for sovereignty and self-determination, and was a frontline activist at Mauna Kea and Standing Rock. Keoni, you can go ahead.
My name is Keoni DeFranco, and I live in Waimanalo on the windward side of the island of Oahu. My ohana, or family name, is Naholowa'a, and originally hails from Kohala on Mokuo Keawe, the island of Hawaii. I wanted to begin by sharing an oli, or chant, composed by Aunty Pua Case, a leader of the movement to protect Mauna Kea. The chant begins by calling to our Hoa'aina, our fellow Hawaiians, our Hoa Velolike, our Pacific cousins, including every one of my fellow panelists. If the Pacific Ocean touches your borders and mine, then we are family. Our Ho'apili, our indigenous cousins fighting American imperialism all over the world, and our Hoa Aloha, all of our allies around the world who stand shoulder to shoulder with us in our battle for freedom. Aina, Velolike, aloha, uglue na uglue hai, mau magagua, magagayo, hue, gugia imau, boa gugu, ili gabualoa, guavaiola. This chant describes our movement as strong as a mountain, strong as a tree, strong as a rock, and calls for our movements to rise like a mighty wave. Hawaii's strategic location in the Pacific has made it the nerve center of American imperialist ambitions and operations in the region. Hawaii is one of the most densely militarized regions under US control. The military occupies 200,000 acres, or roughly 20% of the land across the entire island chain, and 22% of the land on Oahu. Today, the military has 50,000 active duty personnel and 85,000 dependents stationed in Hawaii, making up 11% of the state's residents. By comparison, the Kanaka Maoli Native Hawaiian population in Hawaii is about 250,000, or 20% of the total state population, while representing 50% of its homeless. The total global Kanaka Maoli population is about 525,000, meaning that almost half of our people have already been displaced from our homeland. The median price of a home on Oahu just hit a record high of 1.2 million. The central conflict between Native Hawaiians and the military is over the control of land, an issue which is tied to the question of sovereignty and cultural survival. Hawaii continues to exist as a sovereign nation under military occupation. The military occupies the richest and most strategic locations, including important religious sites, fishing, farming, hunting, and gathering areas, making food sovereignty a constant challenge. 90% of our food is imported, making us particularly vulnerable to natural disasters and global events that might disrupt shipping and the food supply. Prior to Western contact, we supported a population of up to 1.5 million with vast regenerative agricultural systems, which were dismantled for extractive and exploitative industries, such as sugar. The Kanaka Maoli story begins with the Kumolipo, our creation chant. Thousands of lines long, this chant showed a deep scientific understanding of the creation of the world and the biological evolution of humans. From darkness, Po, came light. From microbes in the ocean evolved sea life. from mammals walking onto land came the Kanaka humans. We understood our deep genealogical connection to the ocean, to the land, and to all living things, and lived harmoniously in a regenerative agricultural society. The Polynesians left South Asia, most likely Taiwan, in 5,500 BC, traveling east through the Pacific Ocean, following the direction of shark migrations, who seasonally swam from underwater hotspot to hotspot. They followed the direction of the sun during the day and course corrected using the stars at night. They discovered and arrived in Hawaii in different waves between 400 and 900 AD. Our people had a deep reverence for our Aumakua spirit guides who led us home. We understood our place in society as stewards of the land and ocean. Since time immemorial, we stood as Kia'i, protectors and guardians of our natural resources, land, and water. Pre-Western contact, we lived on communal land and a highly organized agricultural system which shared resources divided by region in an ahupua'a structured system. It was critical to keep the water flowing, uninterrupted from mountain to ocean. When diverted for agriculture, the water was always brought back to the stream. Today, our water rights are consistently challenged by corporations illegally diverting water for commercial purposes, leading to droughts in places like West Maui. We lived in a values-oriented spiritual system using myth-telling blended with science to impose the importance of conservation of natural resources. To the Kanaka, we understood that when a place was deemed sacred, such as Mauna Kea, it generally indicated that the area held life-giving natural resources, such as water. 1778 was the beginning of Western contact and the displacement of our people. Cook's End was on Hawai'i Island in South Kona as he attempted to kidnap King Kalaniʻōpuʻu. From Cook's arrival, the population dropped from 1.5 million down to 40,000 Kanaka alive. In 1850, Kanaka made up 98% of the population of Hawaii. 46 years later, in 1896, that shrank to 36%. This is where we begin to see the colonial settler state emerge. To tell a long story quickly, after initial Western contact, Hawaii became a favored trading route between Asia and the Western world, and sugar rose as a primary export. Hawaii became independently wealthy extremely quickly, signing dozens of international treaties, establishing independent sovereignty and neutrality in the League of Nations, and established embassies and diplomats around the world, including Washington, D.C., London, Paris, Berlin, as well as Japan and South Africa. On July 6, 1846, the US signed a formal recognition of Hawaiian independence. With rising economic opportunity, American businessmen and missionaries began to plot a coup over a number of years with the support of the US Navy. As the United States, a country built off the backs of stolen slave labor, expanded as far west as it could, it needed to continue its never-ending capitalist greed with imperial expansion into the Pacific. It began with sugar, but the ultimate goal was to build strategic military bases in Hawaii to establish violent dominance in the Indo-Pacific region while exploiting labor as well as land and water. On January 16, 1893, Queen Liliuokalani, who led a progressive constitutional monarchy, was overthrown by the United States, who landed Marines from the USS Boston without permission or request of the Hawaiian government, claiming an imminent threat to American lives and property. 24 hours after landing of American troops, leaders of the armed coup read a proclamation deposing the Queen and establishing a provisional government of Hawaii. On July 7, 1898, the Hawaiian Islands were illegally annexed by a unilateral joint resolution creating the territory of Hawaii. To date, there is no treaty of annexation, and Hawaii remains a sovereign nation under military occupation. By 1919, Kanaka owned just 6% of the land, while corporations owned 74%. The 1993 apology resolution by the US Congress concedes that the overthrow of the Kingdom of Hawaii occurred with the active participation of agents and citizens of the United States, and the Native Hawaiian people never directly relinquished to the United States their claim to their inherent sovereignty as a people over their national lands, either through the Kingdom of Hawaii or through a plebiscite, a referendum. Now I want to walk us through a number of Kanaka-led demilitarization efforts. The military Pohakuloa training area is a 133,000-acre live fire bombing range with 7 million rounds of various weapons fired annually. During World War II, US Marines began using the land for live fire training exercises. Pohakuloa sits on seized Hawaiian crown lands, known as ceded lands, taken at the time of the overthrow. Ceded lands are public lands and are required to be held in trust by the state for Kanaka beneficiaries and the general public at large. However, after World War II, the Army obtained a 65-year lease from the state of Hawaii for a single dollar. Since the 1960s, Pohakuloa has become a training ground for nuclear warfare. Depleted uranium, or DU rounds, were used to replicate the actual firing of nuclear weapons. Biannually, RIMPAC training exercises converge on Pohakuloa with 22 countries participating in active war games. Every branch of the military uses Pohakuloa for training. The firing area has never been cleaned up, meaning the remnants from these shells are still in the ground and have been seeping into underground aquifer for decades. Even if the DU shells are no longer being used, as you continue to fire upon the area, the DU in the ground explodes, sending aerosol particles into the air, affecting the families downwind as well as the military themselves. The threat of widespread radiation and contamination in the area is real. Pohakuloa is also the site of sacred temples, heiaus built by elites such as Umi, and burial grounds. There has never been a full archaeological survey of these sites. In 2014, a lawsuit was filed suing the state for failing to protect the land under Pohakuloa and attempting to cancel the state's lease. In 2019, a court ruled in favor, and the Department of Land and Natural Resources was ordered to develop and implement a plan to ensure that public lands like Pohakuloa are cared for by the military. But there's been no follow-through or cleanup efforts. Pohakuloa's lease is set to expire in 2029, and the Army is currently negotiating with the state to extend it until 2078. The Army is currently conducting an environmental impact statement and accepting public comments. I will be sharing a form in the chat if you'd like to participate. Pohakuloa has the highest concentration of endangered species of any US Army installation in the world. The area is nonstop desecrated. You can feel the ground rumble when you are in the region, and it hurts your soul. Kanaka have fought for decades to close the base and end the lease. All live fire at Pohakuloa must cease immediately, and the area must be cleaned up. Kaho'olawe is a successful example of nonviolent direct action that resulted in the military turning land back after claiming it was critical for national security. After the Pearl Harbor attack, the US entrance into World War II, the military imposed martial law in Hawaii and took control of the island of Kaho'olawe for live fire training. In 1976, Walter Riddy and other members of the Protect Kaho'olawe Ohana began a series of occupations on the island, risking arrest or death as they tried to stop the bombing. The PKO sued the Navy, and years later, the bombing was ordered to stop. In 1993, Congress voted to end all military use of Kaho'olawe and transfer the land back to the state, held in trust until the establishment of a sovereign Hawaiian governing entity. However, Kaho'olawe is still littered with debris and unexploded ordnance. The water table cracked, and the work to restore the land is ongoing. Pu'uloa, now known as Pearl Harbor, was famous for its rich fish ponds and lo'ikalo patches, which fed thousands on the island. It has now been turned into a Superfund site after decades of toxic waste leaking from military installations into the water, one of 4 Superfund sites just on Oahu. North in Kapukaki is the Red Hill Fuel Facility. Initially constructed in 1940 to support US imperialist military ambitions in the Pacific with the capacity to hold 250 million gallons of fuel. It is the world's largest underground fuel storage facility, constructed just 100 feet above Oahu's sole source aquifer. Red Hill has spilled an estimated 180,000 gallons of petroleum since opening, including 3 reported leaks in the past 12 months. The Navy's own estimates are that chronic leaks from the Red Hill fuel tanks are probably over 5,000 gallons per year. Many of the corroding 80-year-old tanks have not been inspected, and 20 to 40 years. The facility has been leaking directly into the soil beneath it for decades and is now entering the aquifer every single day. On November 20th, 2021, 14,000 gallons of petroleum spilled. However, the Navy did not alert Board of Water Supply, Department of Health, the public, or even their own service members who gathered for Thanksgiving dinners with their families that weekend, given no warning that their drinking water had been contaminated. Within weeks, hundreds of people ended up in the hospital. In all, 98,000 homes were contaminated, 2,000 people became sick, and hundreds ended up in the ER. The spill occurred within the Red Hill well, contaminating the Navy's own water supply, which also supplies 13 elementary schools as well as civilian housing areas. A lava shaft, located 500 feet from Red Hill, is Honolulu's main water source. It, along with 3 other major wells, have now been taken offline forever as a direct result of the contamination. Honolulu is now using backup wells and diverting water from outside the city to service its residents. We are currently in a water shortage with water restrictions in place that we expect to intensify in the coming weeks. The Navy finally announced in February that it would begin to move towards creating a plan to defuel and decommission Red Hill fuel facility. However, on their own self-imposed timeline. It took many years of public pressure from organizations such as Sierra Club, Hawaii Peace and Justice, and the Oahu Water Protectors. However, our fight is just beginning. Last week, the Navy presented these visuals, which clearly show a fuel plume is traveling west. Only 150 gallons have been cleaned up and recovered since the spill last year. This fuel does not simply disappear. It is actively entering our aquifer every single day and heading into new areas. Over the course of the last few weeks, hundreds of military families have begun reporting the same petroleum-related symptoms they experienced last fall. If the military continues to gaslight, claiming their water testing report no increased levels of contamination, the Navy has refused to commit to a defueling timeline, so we expect them to drag their feet and miss their self-imposed milestones. If the fuel spreads directly into Honolulu's water system, it will lead to the end of life on Oahu within weeks. We will face mass evacuations as all of our aquifers are interconnected underground. Honolulu will become uninhabitable without water. This is why we say Ola Ikapai, water is life. The Oahu Water Protectors demand that the Navy immediately defuel and decommission its Red Hill fuel facility. The only way to truly defeat the US industrial military complex is through a process of demilitarization and decolonization. Justice cannot exist for Native communities whose lands were stolen without the return of these lands and the restoration of their governing powers over the lands. Hand in hand with that comes a withdrawal of US troops from all around the world. The residents of Oahu are being asked to reduce our water usage by 10% as a result of the Red Hill spill. We say the Navy must immediately remove 10% of their troops from our shores. Military bases and outposts, especially those unused, must be closed immediately and returned to the Kanaka, along with the 200,000 acres of stolen crown lands that have been earmarked for resettlement of Hawaiians. I say that we as Kanaka move to reoccupy this land and build our own self-sustaining off-grid food sovereign communities. There are 250,000 Kanaka living in Hawaii. If we self-organize, we would only need 125,000 to pull in any direction to begin a process of self-determination as an indigenous occupied people. As Kanaka, we are the descendants of brave navigators who settled an oceanic continent of checkered island nations, and we will be victorious in our struggle to regain the self-governance and sovereignty of our homelands. Red Hill will be shut down, but that is only the beginning of our generation's fight for decolonization, deoccupation, and demilitarization. Makua Valley and Mauna Kea are next. True liberation from global capitalistic imperialism can only occur by coalition building to dismantle the American empire brick by brick. It will be accomplished by the working class and people from around the world working together, standing up against our collective occupier and calling for a true huli, revolution. I believe we can accomplish this together. This panel has been a great opportunity to learn, collaborate, and create pilina relationships with our Hoa'aina and our Ho'avelalike. Ola ika wai. Mahalo.